Right, welcome back to our final panel discussion and our final session of the whole Tommy Flowers Network Conference. I've been really looking forward to this because this is a real heavyweight panel in terms of AI and ML experience and expertise, particularly in terms of operationalizing it. So I'd like to just briefly introduce the panel in case you haven't been with all of our speaker sessions today. We have Dr. Matloob Khushi, who's a senior lecturer in AI at University of Suffolk. James Hamilton, who's the head of commercial data science at TUI. Libby Kinsey, who's the head of data science, strategy and operations at Ocado. Professor Maria Fasli, who's the executive dean, faculty science and health at University of Essex. And then we have Tuba Islam, who's a machine learning specialist at Google Cloud. And it gives me great pleasure to actually introduce the chair of this panel, and that's Adrian Joseph, who's the managing director, Group AI and Data Solutions at BT. So really, from my perspective, very prestigious panel. And I'll have one question to kind of kick it off, and then Adrian, I'll hand over to you. And it's one that came in to me via email about we've been talking about operationalizing AI and ML in companies. So what do you see as the single biggest obstacle to deploying AI and ML operationally in large companies? And Adrian, I'll start with you on that one because I know that's a particular issue that we're grappling with at BT, and then I'll hand over to you for the rest of the session.
Yeah, well, I mean, I thought I was going to be asking the questions, but thank you so much for that. I mean, for me, I think it's about, being really focused on use cases, on business outcomes. I think the magic happens when we get three things happening, right? We've got the deep technical expertise that's represented on this call and in the audience. We've got deep domain expertise, and then we focus on the customer. And if we can get those three things, happening in unison, then I think we move much faster than we otherwise could. So I think for me that's probably the biggest thing. What do others on the panel think? I got to ask the question then.
Maybe I could answer from my previous experience. So I was spending a lot of time before joining Ocado Technology trying to advance AI maturity with large organizations in the UK, mostly traditional organizations. And I think the biggest problems were to do with business culture and change. So it's a huge digital transformation process to become data-driven, AI-driven, and not so much a technology one, or at least that comes afterwards.
Yeah, why don't we go to anybody else want to jump in?
I think, I agree with both points so far. I think absolutely you've got to identify where the value is. I think there's a lot of excitement about it, and sometimes it's sort of always almost more important to use the latest technology and the latest approaches than it is to actually deliver the value, and really understanding how you do that, I think is what's key to success.
If I can come into this from an academic point of view, when we work with organizations, when we talk to stakeholders like businesses and public sector organizations, there's a willingness there to identify AI and data science techniques and then attempt to deploy them. But one of the key problems is the lack of skills within organizations. And this is something that is recognized within the UK and internationally, and obviously ourselves as universities, as higher education institutions. But maybe we need to think about upskilling people, not just in universities, but earlier as well as later. So upskilling and embedding the right skills within an organization is really important.
Tuba, I think you're on.
Yes, just noticed that. That ties very nicely with this support from senior management. I think that can be an obstacle sometimes if you don't have enough support. Although if you have the appetite from the teams, they are willing to do things, but they cannot make that decision for the investment or to have access to different sources that are mandatory to move things forward. So yeah, management support, I would say, another important thing.
Matloob?
And if I can quickly share my experience in these domains, I worked in the health sector for a long time, and also lately done some financial modeling. In terms of financial modeling, what I've observed that as an academic, you've been the typical framework, as we know, you train your ML method on your training data, and then you show your efficacy on the test data. But the thing is, when you implement your ML onto like the live environment, that you are now part of that whole thing. Now you're changing the dynamics of the market. For example, to give you a simple example, if your ML method gonna buy like 100,000 shares, then obviously now you have changed the dynamics of the markets. You have contributed in the fall of markets. So your method that you've been trained on has not taken that account into that, the dynamic change that your own ML method has introduced into the dynamics of the markets. So it's going to fail up there. And in terms of like the medical space, we've seen like the problem is, again, from management point of view, and the clinicians, they are not ready to trust your methods, and they want to see the underlying mechanism and how that's been, how the ML has taken that decision. And sometimes it's very hard to explain that, especially if you're using the deep learning.
Yeah, so lots there around, explainability, around skills, around value. When I think about value, I think about both business value and societal value. But on the business value front, having a clear connection to, is this going to drive more revenue? Is it going to improve efficiency? Is it going to improve NPS, customer experience? And is it going to help us manage risk more effectively? So I think of 4 value levers when I think about the alignment between what we're trying to do from a technology perspective and how that links to those 4 levers. The skills one is a massive one, right? I was at London Tech Week a few weeks ago and attended a subgroup to talk about skills. I mean, in my view, that's probably the single biggest challenge that we've got, as a sector. So I'd love, one comment from each of you on, what's the one thing that we can do? One thing, each of you, that we can do on skills to get more people, with the scars, right, and the right experience and the passion and interest in what we do. And Maria, thank you very much for your 2 ideas on get them earlier and get them older as well. But Libby, do you want to come in and then I'll go around?
I do. So I have been a little bit frustrated about the rhetoric on skills in this country, and I think it's been a bit too narrow, and it's focused very much on developing algorithmic skills and much less on many of the other skills required to participate in this exciting area. So Zoe in her talk talked about needing people with domain experience and being product specialists. Many of us have talked about the kind of engineering challenges that are involved and not about algorithms. So those kind of DevOps, ML ops, machine learning engineer skills. And more broadly, it's there perhaps has been a perception of data science being something of a lone individual sat in front of a computer, but it's very much a team sport. It's a collaborative area. So just being a bit more attractive to those different people with different skills and things to bring, and show that they can be part of and fit into the great enterprise of getting data-driven products and services to market.
Great. Anybody else want to jump in? Tuba, do you want to jump in now on skills?
Yeah,
One thing to do?
I think for the skills, it would be good to find ways to encourage people to focus on the business side, because there's more creativity there. And I think it's about the technology evolving right now. We get to a point where we see that machine learning part is the easy part. The algorithm part is the easy part with the automation. And on the technology side, when we start democratization of the machine learning tools, when we start to build things that you don't need to spend hours for programming, it's already there. You don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time. It will be easier for people to focus on the business, spend more time on the business side also, and also integration side, how to get the value out of the models, how to use them in production. I think we are heading in the right direction, though. I'm quite optimistic on that.
Good. James, do you want one thing on skills? Just one thing?
Well, I'm tempted to say exactly what Libby said. I think that could have come out of my own mouth. That I mean, I think for me, it's definitely about those kind of wider behaviors. So actually, the people who are most successful in my team have characteristics like curiosity and creativity, because what they're doing is they're understanding the business, and they're looking at opportunities to sort of solve problems. They're not necessarily the most technical specialists, but they're the people who can be effective in solving the problems that we've got.
Okay. So Maria, you brought us into this and you gave us some ideas already. So I'm going to go to Matloob, if that's all right. One thing from you?
Yeah, it's the same thing as I said before. Like if we can work a little bit on explainability part, like the clinicians, if we can show that it's the same area of the image probably that the ML is looking at, which you're gonna as a human look at and make your decision. If we can explain that very well, if it matches the knowledge of the clinician, then it's gonna trust him and then make use of that ML method. So explainability is an important skill, I think.
Okay, so I'm going to move a little bit, Maria, unless there was something else that you wanted to add. Are you sure? Okay, so you know, the whole kind of thing about public image, right? And a lot of that links to explainability. We've talked about that a little bit here. You know, what impact do you think the public image of what you do, you know, has to do with the rate of adoption? And does everything need to be explained in AI? Who wants to start? Tuba, your algorithm isn't working.
No, there's a baby in the house downstairs.
How cool is that? Yeah. So,
I believe it is not necessary to explain all the models. To be honest, that's my view. I hope somebody disagrees, so we have a fruitful discussion here. But I think if it's a regulated industry, that's for sure. It's like healthcare or maybe finance and some other industries, but not even within a regulated industry. Not all models needs to be explained, I think. And I think the image right now, because of some examples we have seen recently where we have seen some bias in the models, and they were like on Twitter or shared publicly, examples for people that are not interested in machine learning. They get across with those applications and notice that it can go wrong. We have to manage that image. It's getting harder when we have those public announcements, but we need to have the opposite side as well and make it like promote that it is possible to explain them at a certain level, not perfectly, but at a certain level. And there's too much work going on to make it better. So we are, again, I will be the optimistic person again in this call, but it is not easy, but it is doable at a certain level. And I think it needs to be organic. We will just let it be after a while if it is not something really mission critical.
Okay,
and we can benefit.
Yeah, anybody else want to jump in on how do we achieve a better public image for data science and maybe the role of explainability, but whatever you think. Libby, why don't you go?
Well, so yeah, sticking with explainability, I think that a lot of, again, the conversation around explainability has tended to assume that there's this monolithic thing that is something that's explainable. And there's so much nuance in what does an explanation need to be for which different audience. So I think I was really impressed with some work that the ICO did with Alan Turing Institute, where they had some citizen juries that attempted in a couple of different areas to work out what is an appropriate explanation, what would you be happy with if you received it. And it was I guess, attempting to develop some norms so that if you're developing something in a similar area, at least you know what you're aiming for. And we just need a lot more of those norms so that as practitioners, we have confidence that if we develop something and we can explain it in this way to this level, then that will be appropriate for our audience, for the people that are impacted, for the whatever we do.
Anybody else want to come in on, what can we do? Yeah, Maria, please jump in.
So I agree with what has been said, and we do need to develop some norms. I think where we need to be able to explain models is where we have really sensitive applications and people's lives are being affected at a fundamental level, or we have groups being identified and their lives potentially being affected. So I can think of public sector organizations, child welfare, family welfare, where we want to have targeted interventions, and there where you want to make use of data and apply data science and AI techniques, you just need to have confidence. You need to have rigorous processes in place and be absolutely certain what it is that you're getting out and how it is that it's the decision based on the outcome is gonna affect individuals. But for me, we need explainability, not necessarily in absolutely every single application of AI. We need to develop norms. But I want to link this topic to the previous one. Actually, I did lie. I wanted to come back in at the end of it, because for me, skills development is not just developing the technical skills, but there's also a level of developing an understanding of data science and data, so data literacy. Across the population. So when we talk about explainability and when we demonstrate data, then the public can better understand what it is that we're trying to do. Because if they are being fed information and data that is it's not accurate, we need to develop this critical thinking, if you like, or the computational thinking, not just within our technical staff, but across the population. So whereas as a child I learn arithmetic, perhaps children need to go a step further, and we need to look at the curriculum again and make sure that this is embedded across the board.
Yeah, I'm gonna maybe just ask a question here and ask James and Matloob maybe just to jump in. So, I look at what we're doing in AI, right? And I think about the move towards self-driving cars, and we will probably have self-driving flying cars before we have self-driving cars, because it's easier to do that than in the streets of Paris. But at the same time, right, we have examples of AI that can't discern whether Serena Williams or a number of very prominent black women are actually women. How can we in terms of the public image question, how can we have these two extreme situations where we're talking about self-driving cars but we can't tell whether somebody with a black face is a woman?
Yeah, I think one of the we having two extreme ends of perception in artificial intelligence or data science. I would probably like to say that on the one hand, people feel like, oh, these are the perfect algorithms; they cannot make mistakes. Or nowadays we got artificial intelligence, which probably you have that notion of you're gonna solve every problem of human life with this black box, with this magic thing. And on the other hand, we have that extreme end that, as you're mentioning, we are even failing to identifying a normal human beings or the black women. So I think, as Maria said, a little bit data literacy, like people, it's just having these kind of talks, or maybe doing a little bit of reality type show where you kind of teach people that it's okay to fail, like technology fails. And we've recently seen an example of Facebook going down. And nowadays people too much rely on this WhatsApp or these apps or communication app, like they are now kind of mainstream apps for communication. People now rely more on data rather than the normal telephonic calls. So I think it's important to kind of teach people that it's okay to fail, and technology do fail. There are many examples, and and also letting people know that it's just we're just scratching the surface of this artificial intelligence. We're not yet up there. So we getting we are improving these algorithms. We are getting things right, but they're not like the magic box which gonna solve every problem of the world.
Okay.
So,
just on, and I mean, Tuba, you have talked about the importance of diversity roles in MLOps. James, any thoughts on that? How relevant is diversity in our space in AI data science?
And I think it's extremely important. And I think diversity in the very broadest sense is important, because I think the what we need is a range. We talked about the skills earlier on, and I think you need a whole range of perspectives. And I think actually that's the way to get to the best solutions. What you don't want is a sort of single educational route, or or people from a certain area or with a certain background. Actually, to get the best results, you want, even if you're only looking from a sort of not in terms of fairness, but in terms of actually how to get the best outcomes, you get that by getting a whole range of different views from people or with different kinds of backgrounds and different kinds of experience. And I think trying to make sure that encourage that it's not although this panel is sort of reasonable, generally speaking, I don't think it's the most diverse area. Certainly I look at my team and that's not the case at the moment. So I think it is an area that needs focus because yes, I mean I think it's important, and it will lead to us getting better outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the UK, something like only 14% of AI and data scientists are female, and we've seen since the 1990s no increase in the mix of people publishing from gender mixes, and we see it also, of course, in ethnic diversity. Unless there's any other points anybody wants to make on the relevance of diversity in helping us to drive more adoption, then I'm going to move us on and ask you about what's the biggest frustration that you come across in your organization in scaling data science. And I'm not going to ask Tuba that question, of course, because that would be like, we don't, it's just part of our DNA, maybe. But anybody want to jump in on that one? What's the biggest frustration that you've got? Anybody on the call in embedding this in your organization?
Happy to start. So in some ways feeds on from the conversation I think we were having just now, which is that I mean there are many frustrations, but I think both a kind of an impatience and an expectation that it's possible to achieve much more quickly than is realistic, and also an expectation that that AI can solve everything. And I think the reality is actually it's difficult. And you need to find, as I was saying in my talk earlier on, you need to find the right problems where actually it provides the right kind of solution. And getting it right takes time, and there will be mistakes. And in the short term, sometimes that will mean that things get worse in order to sort of learn and to get better over time. And I think, although generally we are an organisation that I think is, for a traditional company, are quite forward-looking, and we are accepting of this, and there's a lot of support, I think sometimes where there is an unrealistic expectation of what we can achieve and how quickly.
One very, very quick question, 30-second answer from you, James. So, I mean, the world has changed in the midst of pandemic, right? Chewy's revenues have gone, I think somebody said, from 18 to 8, right? Are all of your models now outdated?
I hope not. I think, again, linking back to to what I said during my talk earlier on, I think what is important is this is where kind of understanding what your models do and what they don't is really important. And so I don't think all our models are broken, but that's because we understand their strengths and weaknesses. We understand what will still work and what doesn't. And that's where that kind of explainability and being able to really understand what the model's doing and why becomes really important as you deal with these changes.
So, Libby, I'm going to come to you because I spent some time at your shop about a year ago, down at your, brilliant warehouse where you've got all of those robots that you built yourselves, and they're running around, and they're all being optimized by AI and ML and data science, and it's a beautiful thing. And of course, that 1 hour slot that you promised, my wife and me to deliver, our stuff in, you're using it to optimize the experience, right? And I understand you're also using computer vision, right, to discern whether or not those crates, those, when they need to be washed. And you might think that's a trivial use case, but how do you discern between, a stain, which means you don't need to wash the crate, and a piece of dirt? So you have embedded AI into everything that you do, a bit like Google being an AI first company, right? So, you move from being mobile first to cloud first to AI first. What's your biggest frustration in embedding AI at scale in your organization?
Well, it's a really good question. So in a way, I haven't encountered any frustrations because I've joined this organization only recently that is operating at scale in many, many different areas across lots of different techniques and modalities. I suppose that's part of why I've joined though. So Ocado has been a pioneer in many senses. I think it's had data science in production since 2006, something like that. But it's maybe been a little bit organic in how it's grown. So there's been a huge recent investment over the last year in thinking about how we can run AI like a factory, to quote the session title. And that's involved restructuring so that we have data science embedded in our product streams. So they're much closer to those domain experts. We can make sure that data science is applied at the right time to the right things, and we've got the right roadmaps in place. Whereas before it was a centralized model. It's about the processes and tooling that we have in place. So again, all of our data scientists have tools available to them and obviously can use them because we've got everything in production. But we need to make that effort much, much lower, reduce the effort to impact and value. So thinking a lot about MLOps, as I know that Zoe and yourself are at BT. And the whole people conversation. So everything relies on our people. So how do we make sure that we've got good operating models with the other teams in engineering or product or whatever it might be? How do we ensure there's knowledge sharing across our data scientists so that we're not reinventing the wheel? How do we attract great talent and retain it in what is a very, very competitive environment? So that's the next big challenge.
Okay. Tuba, I was telling Porky Pies, I'm actually going to ask you why is Google not making more progress on AI? What's slowing you down?
I think the speed is quite high, but there are so many moving parts in an ML ops, like I mentioned in my presentation. So it is quite a dynamic environment, and the requirements change every day. It's evolving environment, which makes our jobs, I think, enjoyable, not boring at all. So that's why there's one development today, and you think that, okay, now I'm on it, but more requirement comes in, and there's another development. So that's why the dynamic nature makes it challenging, I think.
And how do you ensure, because you have like AI embedded across, like, I was at Google for 10 years, right? So I know a little bit about your business, not as much as you do. You've got DeepMind. I mean, how do you ensure that people aren't reinventing stuff in Google? Just very briefly, how do you share best practice? How do you disseminate knowledge in AI and data science?
It's the collaboration between teams, I think, that plays an important role. The communication channel between teams, between product management and people in the field working closely with the customers and people in the research teams like DeepMind. Everybody can access to each other very quickly with one ping. If you have a question, you raise it and you just share ideas or start a chat group and exchange ideas. So that kind of a dynamic communication is helping, I think.
Okay. Maria, I'm going to come to you and change a little bit now. You know, you mentioned the challenges of collaborating with partners in AI projects and, you know, looking towards federated learning to manage some of these challenges. You know, what's your view and anybody else on the panel about the best way to manage collaboration with internal, as Tuba just mentioned, but also external contributors in AI projects? Start with you, Maria. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Adrian. So for us as an organization, obviously collaboration internally can be achieved. We are a relatively small institution. We know each other. The University of Essex is an institution that has quite the appetite to use data, and we have been using data. We have developed a team within the organization. My frustration around collaboration as an academic is at the level of us being able to work with external stakeholders to help them and support them, take some of the techniques that we are developing from an academic point of view, apply them in real data sets, and work together so that the organizations can benefit. We can see real impact of our work emerging in society, not just for business profit, but across the board. And data sharing in this respect still remains a really big challenge. I touched on this a little bit at in my talk, and then I talked about federated learning, which is an idea, of course, that has emerged out of Google and continues to develop. So that might give us a way forward, but there are organizations that have the appetite. They have different sections. They have a legal team, which tends to be typically quite conservative, and they don't want to risk everything by sharing data with academics for the purposes of supporting research. So I have to say that this is one of my biggest frustrations.
Anybody else want to make a point on that one around collaborating with external partners in particular?
Not really, Adrian, for external partners, but I do want to share my frustration about my area of work, working in an academia. Like I come from University of Sydney. Say I worked there for 13 years. In those type of like top organizations, they do have a lot of pressure on publishing in top avenues. And in top university, there's a race of getting your papers published in top avenues and then having citation and that kind of stuff. And if you're getting somehow those metrics right, then you are employable, you get promoted and those kind of things. And then you have kind of other universities where the more kind of pressure is on getting more recruitment up for students and having your numbers right. And you are really you are very much busy into getting your numbers right for your program of whatever program you've been managing, more around teaching, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So the collaboration, like having that real impact, like that's not really being counted very well towards, when you really want to make some contribution, you really want to do something for the society and to establish some really good collaboration where you do make a contribution. But the thing is, in academia, that's very tricky. Like, I mean, it's different for the Maria. She's already, professor. She's like probably the top of her. Yeah. So she may be, making those kind of metrics, but it's difficult for people like from anywhere between lecturer to associate professor, where they want to get established. So,
right. So yeah, publish or perish is part of the thing. So I know it looks like we're going to need to wrap up in a minute. I do want one final thing from each of you, please. What's the metric you care about the most in terms of deployment of data science at scale? Each of you, just one. What's the one metric you care about the most, or think we should care about the most? Tuba, I'm going to start with you. What's the one metric we should care about the most in terms of
thinking? Just one metric is difficult, but I think in operations it would be like the total value you get from the models in production. I would say.
Okay, cool. James.
It's a very difficult question, so I'm going to give a slightly.
I know, that's what I'm paid for, right? And that's what
Absolutely. I'm going to give a slightly different answer, which is that actually I care most about the sort of happiness and satisfaction of my team, because ultimately, in terms of long-term output, they need to be doing work they're enjoying and finding interesting.
Okay, cool. Libby, one thing. Metric you care about the most. Can't hear you. Voice recognition.
I said I really wanted to steal James's because that is really important, but I think maybe I'm going to go with ROI.
ROI. Maria.
Who benefits from the application of data science and AI techniques?
Okay. Matloob.
I think impact on business operations.
Okay. Good. Well, listen, thank you all. It looks like, are we being called to time now? Is that what we're being done here? Well, listen, fabulous conversation. Thank you so much, all of you, for your contribution. Really, really appreciate it. And I know, certainly I learned a lot on this. So thank you for that too.
Great. So yeah, Adrian, thank you very much. I could have actually listened to this for another couple of hours, but I know we've all got day jobs to go back to as well at the end of the day. So Adrian, James, Matloob, Libby, Tuba, Maria, thank you all very much. Really fascinating panel discussion. So I'd like to bring in Carol Fletcher, who's really the sponsor and brains behind the Tommy Flowers Network event. So any final words from you, Carol?
Well, it's been a bit of a whirlwind of 3 days, I think, Mike. I've learned a lot, and I was just trying to think about, what are the key things that I'm going to take away from the last 3 days. Some amazing speakers, some fantastic panel discussions. I think 2 things have really stood out for me, and one of them is skills. That's a problem, I think, that we need to crack for the whole industry in terms of getting people with the right skills to move data science and AI forward. And the second thing is something that really pleases me, because I'm always saying that research is a team game, and it very much seems to me that many of the contributors, particularly those from industry, when they've talked about their challenges and their problems, I'm seeing some of the same topics coming up again and again, which suggests, working together, working collaboratively is perhaps how we're going to solve some of these big problems.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, and I think I had so many insights. I actually start making handwritten notes to kind of keep track of them all. But if we go back to day one, for those of you that were with us for the whole 3 days, we had a whole thing about models and data wrangling. How do you actually build the models in the first place? And in some cases, how do you build the models to check the models? And then day 2, we got into anomalies, glitches, and basically how to find them, bias, transparency, and so forth. I actually got thrown into that mix as well in terms of one of the issues that we're grappling with. And then today was about operationalizing all of this complexity to actually benefit the business and bring value from it at the end of the day. But there was kind of 4 takeaways for me in this. One of them was the bias, the transparency, and explainability. Huge issue in terms of systems, particularly as you begin to get into automated systems to some extent. This whole issue of data wrangling. How do you know your data is right in the first place? Because I know it comes in different structures, different formats, and it may not even be right in the first place in terms of inputting it into your different models. And then there's the discussion we had today about operationalizing it and scaling it. But to your point, and to a point I think the panel just made, it's about skills. There's a huge skill shortage in this area, and I think there's a huge amount more work to do in skills from that. So that was kind of my outtake from it. And so, Carol, over to you for final comments.
Final comments. So I just mainly want to say some huge thank yous to the team who've made this all possible. So to the team from BT, to Mike, to Simon, to Rika and Sarah, and also the amazing team from Quatreus that make this all happen. Our live audience, we've had a small live audience every day, which has been amazing to have. We've not had that for nearly 2 years. And a huge thank you to obviously our participants who've all been taking part, who've been active in the chat, the panelists, the speakers, the chairs of the panels. Wouldn't have happened without you. The content will still be available on Feedloop if you want to catch up or on anything you missed, or if you want to see something again. It'll also be going on our YouTube channel pretty soon, and we'll let you all know when that happens. And just a final plug, this one may be finished, but our next conference is happening, we're planning already, which is next May, and we're going to be looking at digital transformation, which if you thought data science was a big topic, I think this one could be even bigger. So thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week.
See you soon.